the day. You can contact us on Twitter at iProperty or by email at hello@iproperty.com. You can also text into the show on 087-939-2000. Your hosts today are myself, Bryan Fox, and beside me is Tallon.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, we have a special show for you today where we focus on the challenges and opportunities within the planning regime, and we have the experts on hand to help us navigate this. But first, let's look at some of the big property stories of the week. So one of the interesting ones, Brian, I saw was that our Housing Minister hopes to have the rent register legislation in place before the Easter recess.
It's a big development, isn't it?
It is, and it's an important one, particularly in light of the rent pressure zones, because they, in order for them to work, they absolutely depend on transparency and a register whereby tenants can check what rent is actually being paid. It's hard to believe that less than a decade ago we didn't even have a register of national property prices, and back then buyers and sellers, there just wasn't the same certainty and transparency in the market. So actually, by bringing in the rent register, this will add a level of certainty and transparency that the market needs.
So in other words, then, if I'm renting a property, right, or renting an apartment or a house, I will know myself from the register just how many people have been renting this particular property. Is that how it is?
More importantly, you'll know how much the last tenant was paying, so then you'll know that the rent, you will know if the rent was increased by more than the 4% per annum which is allowed.
Right.
So it is an important development, because look, there's a lot of talk anecdotally that there are many ways to circumvent this legislation. For example, there's ambiguity in the law in terms of what constitutes a renovation, as in how extensive that needs to be. And in the past, people were able to let tenants go, give them their notice, and on the basis that they wanted to sell the property. So there's changes all around that legislation to provide.
But it covers
greater,
all properties, whether it's renovated or new or whatever.
Well, not new, because actually this is all for properties that
have already been rented.
New properties are still subject to market forces, and that's the reality. So yeah, that's a big one.
That's to be in before Easter, right? So that's coming.
Well, the legislation will be in place before the
yeah.
Easter recess. But look, we've heard that kind of ambitious talk before, so we'll see if that happens. Yeah. But there was another interesting one there, and this was a piece in the Irish Times talking about the potential price-setting power of institutional landlords. Now, I think this is an interesting one, particularly in light of the emergence of this build to rent sector, or the private rented sector. It's really taken off in a direction that we shouldn't have been surprised by, because it really is mirroring what's happening. So institutional
landlords, I guess, will be banks and so forth. Is that the idea?
More than likely pension funds and private funds, and more often than not, they're not. Well, actually, it can be the REITs as well, but more often than not, they're not Irish.
Yeah, they've been getting a bad press lately, haven't they? In some, am I right on that one?
They have.
They have,
but actually,
funds, yeah.
Well, look, they've been incorrectly called vulture funds as well, and that's an argument for another day. But they're absolutely not vulture funds. They're institutional investors and institutional landlords, and there are other countries and other jurisdictions where this would be the only type of landlords you have, and in fact there are pros and cons to that as well. But the difficulty in Ireland is that we have always had a rental market made up by private and, I'm going to say, amateur landlords, and that's brought its own level of problems. But what's interesting about the piece in the Irish Times is that they were looking at a report that was compiled by the Department of Finance, and essentially what they were talking about is that in certain areas in Dublin, for example in Chapel Lizard, 52% of all the apartment rentals were by institutional landlords. In Tallon, Springfield, that was about 40%. By the way,
sorry, I'm sorry, let you finish off there.
But actually, one of the things I want to point out here is that the analysis didn't find that price setting was already occurring, but it really raised a flag to say that there's a risk that there's such scale of the institutional investor and group of investors coming into Ireland that it is almost inevitable that this could develop into what they described as monopolistic and that they would have such pricing power in the market. So I think it's interesting to see this flagged, because I think maybe opposition to some of these institutional landlords were citing that as an argument. So there's two interesting findings from this report. One, that there has to this point been no price setting, but to the potential for that is pretty huge.
Is that a healthy situation to have 52%? Of the markets of the apartment stock rented out by companies, and is that how would you see that yourself?
That's a little bit like asking, is property ownership good or bad, when there are definitely pros and cons to both sides of that, but the reality is that institutional investors generally bring a more professional slant to the marketplace. But there is space for all landlords, so that's one of the important things. Right. So I think that's a story that probably is going to garner support as we go through. So it'll be interesting to watch that. One of the other stories that caught my eye was the sod turning for the new runway at Dublin Airport, and I think that's actually very timely. That was only in the last couple of days. I think
there was some very good photographs.
There was some very good. Listen, we don't have politicians that take any bad photos, so I don't know what you mean, Brian. But I think what's interesting is that was in the Sunday papers, but actually just today it was reported just in the last few hours that actually Dublin Airport has had its busiest January on record. So in its 79-year history, there's been 2.1 million passengers through Dublin Airport this month. So I think that kind of story really highlights the need to expand Dublin Airport and for the third runway at Dublin Airport, but there has been local opposition.
Well, let me just put something to you, because there's it was a journalist actually who's telling me about it. He's telling me that the Dublin Airport Authority is offering to buy people's homes for the set value with a markup of 30%. Now, I would have thought myself that homes like that are built along an M50 or something like that proposed motorway are CPO'd. They get the market value and that's it. Whereas the DAA now are offering the market value, if I'm correct.
Yeah, no, they're offering market value plus 30%.
That's a fairly generous offer, isn't it?
Well, I, as somebody who doesn't live there, would absolutely look at this and say, yes, that's a generous offer. I wonder if I lived there, would I feel the same way? Again, this seems to be just the latest in a series of objections to big infrastructure plans and very important strategic plans that's happening. And last week we spoke a lot on the show about the importance of public consultation and community engagement, and there is of course a huge importance to that. But we have to think about the economic interests of the state as a whole. And unfortunately, these objections, like many others, they talk about noise levels. Sometimes it's environmental concerns. But the reality is there's always a huge concern that this type of development devalues the value of a home. And the reality is it probably does devalue your home. But can we put the interests of one homeowner over the interests of the state? So we're talking about Dublin Airport. It has had its busiest January on record. Can we really prioritise the individual ownership of the individual's ownership and how their valuation of their home might. So it's not about just the use, because obviously the noise levels actually have been assessed, and there's
at least it's not getting as complicated as Heathrow Airport. Let's put it like that anyway.
Well, not yet. Yeah. But actually, because that's something on the public consultation side, that brings us directly back into planning and the role that the public have in planning. So last week we touched on it. This week we're hoping to get into some further detail on it, and I think our guest today will be able to help us make sense of some of these big planning issues.
Well, this week we have a very special episode of Property Matters. We'll be joined by Dr. William Hynes, Managing Director of Future Analytics Consulting, and veteran property expert Robert Colleran. So Robert, maybe we'll just start with you. Welcome, thank you for coming in.
Thanks very much, Brian.
There's some changes in planning. What is the current state of our planning situation?
I think it's very much work in progress in terms of where we're moving towards, in terms of greater height, in terms of, I suppose, number of cores per apartment unit. There's been a bit of a relaxation by the government in terms of dual aspect. So it's all boding well, but it is work in progress in terms of when you look at STZ, strategic development zones. It's kind of it's enabling, I suppose, as you said, the strategic investment funds, private rental sector development. It's a relaxation of apartment size and type. It's down to, if it's managed within good design, we can allow for I suppose, higher apartment developments with extra amenities. It doesn't have to necessarily have to be higher density, but in key city centre locations, or there might be certain areas like Houston, South Quarter, Cherrywood, that are taking full advantage of these.
I want to talk to you about Airbnb legislation, but just before we go on to that, I mean, it's a point that's quite controversial in Dublin. This is the high-rise type of apartment living. Dublin City Council seems to have a problem with that. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, no. I think traditionally, certain sites were designated for landmark development sites, which would allow greater height, but that could be areas, certain specific sites in the Docklands might be allowed extra height. If you look at I don't know, Sir John Royston's Quay or certain areas where apartments are greater height, whereas traditionally there's a bit of a chop in terms of the height of development in the Docklands in general. So you might get certain buildings that could be up to 12 stories in height, whereas most of them are you're limited by height.
But I'm referring now to apartments that you see on the continent that go 20, 30 floors up. That's not going to be entertained here, is it?
Well, I suppose I don't know what are your thoughts on that, Billy? Can you see it going to that level? Like the Elysian down in Cork is probably the highest so far.
Yeah, and thanks very much for inviting me onto the show this evening. I think your opening question there, Brian, was asking about changing in planning and where we're getting to. Yeah. I think, since 2010, we have seen a definite shift in how planning is being organised, assessed and delivered throughout the country, particularly in our urban areas, our city areas. And that was when the legislation, the 2010 Act came in, when it was put forward that we need a very evidence-based approach. And from that, and also looking beyond Ireland and into the continent, we are learning a lot from what is happening within our neighbouring European cities and beyond. And with that is the complete shift towards urbanisation. So the population is moving towards
shifting towards the city.
Yeah. So with that, the city councils and Dublin City Council within that are realising that there is a need for height increases, there is a need for density, and still remaining within the footprint of our urban area. You know what I mean? So where the legislation has moved us towards this evidence-based, looking to the Europe and beyond is helping us in that situation as well. The increase of urbanisation, population increase in our cities has again led us to this space, and again we're having to respond. We as practitioners, we as city councils, and we as the public have begun to realise that density is not all bad, and it's actually good if properly planned and managed and designed.
Okay, well, let's just look at, speaking of legislation, this Airbnb sector. It's quite controversial, and it's a case where, I think a lot of hoteliers aren't too happy with it. What is the situation now with legislation with that particular issue?
Well, I'd say realistically, I think the timeline will be June by the time it comes into effect. But it's been earmarked by, I suppose, Owen Murphy. It's been earmarked in different
Minister for Housing.
Yeah, Minister for Housing. So I think what will happen is that they'll limit the number of days that a private individual can rent out an apartment, be it a private house in a private house or a private apartment in city centre. So the idea behind it is to limit the level of rent being charged. Obviously, if Airbnb is running in, let's just say, close to Temple Bar, you might be charging a rent that in effect is 2.5 times the open market rental value. So there will be a change to that, but at the same time,
legislatively enforced.
Yeah, I think it will. So it'll mean that you'll have to have limitations to 90 days where you can have it Airbnb. So that might be the summer months, and then outside of that, you'll have to have a straight rental. Or the other talks are that you might have to have commercial rentals of it, that you might have to have monthly rentals or weekly rentals, and limit the rest to maybe the winter months, so you have it as a set tenancy.
As an Airbnb host, if you have an apartment, would say, is it worth your while staying in business?
Certainly, I think some people we'll probably run it to whenever the legislation comes in, and then it's a case that they'll alter it. But straight away, you have different investors that are looking at Ireland. You know, if a property is Airbnb, they're looking at what the rent will revert to when the legislation comes in. You know, from that case, they're going to say, well, when the legislation comes in, what will the open market rent of the property? What will the yield affect, or how will that affect the investment property?
Right.
It will obviously put stress on the hotel market.
You've jumped to my next question now. So briefly, if you could, will there be a lot of stress put on the hotel?
I certainly think so. Yeah.
We have the capacity at the moment to cater for summer traffic.
There's probably. I don't know. Conservatively, there's probably demand for 8,000 beds as it stands within Ireland. You know,
what do we currently have?
In total beds, I'm not too sure what the total figure is, but I just know, just in terms of some of the reports, they were saying 7,500, 8,000 at least, if not 10. Just that's growing demand. Like, if you look at what happens already as the room rates go up, if you can't get a room within city centre, you're forced to locate out towards the airport, out towards West Dublin on a transport line. You know, what happens in general is the room rates go up to, you know, I think there's been a big push it's gone from, you know, recessionary times, 90 odd rooms to minimum 150, 200, and it'd probably go up if there's an event on, or if there's a certain conference on, or a sporting event, room rates will go up. So it will cause unnecessary stress on the market.
And does that explain why we're seeing a shift, almost, I won't say away from hotels as such, but there's definitely seems to be a rise of these hotel apartments. William, have you seen that on the planning side? Are they called apart hotels?
Apart hotels. The likes of Stay City would be one of the market leaders, whereas Stay City would generally, they're more renters than purchasers, so they'd rent out a block of apartments, and then what they'll do is they'll in effect rent them short term as a short stay apart hotel.
Okay.
And as well as that, it probably ties in with planning guidelines as well, whereas certain planning zonings might allow for apart hotel, but they mightn't allow for straight apartments. So
but just going back, say, to the Airbnb situation, I suppose at the time it did respond to a need where there was, say, little development in the hotel business, the hotel industry. They say the tourism sector was quite low, the level of tourism inward, again because of the economic crisis we were in. But it responded to it, and okay, now we're going to get legislation that's going to, say, control or organise that more better. But I thought it was a good, say, springboard to really get the kind of the tourism economic benefits from that really enhanced again within our cities and within Ireland Inc., if you want to call it that. Do you know what I mean? So it was a good opportunity for us. You know what I mean?
Do you welcome the legislation? Do you think it's a good thing?
In certain cases, but in certain situations, you'd hope that it'll free up more standard apartments in Dublin city centre. What happens at the moment is, you know, Dublin 2 rents, Dublin 4 rents are getting too high, where you might have the, you know, I suppose the techie sector might be driving out the rest of the market. So as a result of that, if the rents are going up to €2,500 or €3,000 or higher in around the Docklands, people are getting forced out. So it has a spill-on effect. So then what happens is Dublin 8 or Dublin 7 areas become more attractive, because it starts off that the rents are more affordable. People move in, the rent levels pick up slightly, and next thing you know, the coffee shops pick up, you get a better offering, and in general the area picks up. So there are benefits of it. You know, it impacts, you know, it balances down to areas that need regeneration.
I have a feeling this is a topic that will
go on.
That will go on and on and on. Anyway, I think we'll conclude it for this part of the programme. You're listening to Property Matters here. Join us after the break. We'll be back with William Hynes and Robert Colleran for more discussion on planning.
Will you look at them go? I wish I had their energy. They're good for the soul, though, aren't they? I can't imagine life without Lucky. But he might outlive me yet. Oh, well, take my advice and sign up for a Dogs Trust Canine Care card. It's completely free, and it's given me such peace of mind since I did.
What's that?
Well, it's simple, really. It means if you pass away before Lucky, Dogs Trust will take him in and give him the care and love he needs until they match him with the perfect forever home.
That sounds terrific. How much did you say it costs?
It doesn't cost a cent.
Great. How do I sign up?
Just text CARE to 50100 and they'll call you with more information. Or you can go to dogstrust.ie.
Well, that's wonderful advice. I'll do that right away. Here, Lucky. Good boy.
Whatever loan you're looking for, wedding loans, holiday loans, car or home improvement loans, make sure you talk to your local Capital Credit Union, where there are no hidden charges or early repayment penalties on your loan. Loans subject to approval, terms and conditions apply. Capital Credit Union Limited, regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Senior Line is a confidential telephone service for older people. Free phone 1800 80 45 91. We're open every day of the year from 10 a.m. till 10 p.m, including Christmas Day and New Year. So it's free phone 1800 80 45 91. We're there if you need someone to talk to and need someone to listen. We're older people too, so we will understand, and we're very good at listening. Did you get the Senior Line number? It's free phone 1800 80 45 91.
Your community radio for South Dublin. This is Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters here in Dublin South FM with me, Bryan Fox, and Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iProperty or email hello@iproperty.com, iPropertyRadio.com, excuse me. You can also text into the show at any time, 087 939 2000. And as I said there before the break, we are in studio here with William Hynes and Robert Colleran. So, William, my job now, I'm in a position to ask you, what do you think is the need for more evidence-based analytical approach to planning and to lead improved policy formulation and decision making? I know it's a very big question, but I mean, if you just if you could address it, maybe.
Yeah, again, going back to my earlier comment about the 2010 Planning Act, in that there was a need for this evidence-based, and I suppose it starts with, having an evidence base within your city or county development plan. And one of the bases of the evidence is, say, understanding your population, your demographics, the composition, makeup of that demographic profile of your area. And not only that, but also being able to plan and project forward that population. You know what I mean? And the mix and the composition and where it's going to happen and the cohort analysis of that. So it's really getting down to understanding your citizen needs and the labour force employment needs that generates from that population citizen perspective. So you're
micromanaging basically at a community, at a local level.
Not necessarily micromanaging, but you're getting a really good insight to what's happening at local levels, be it urban, peri-urban, town centre, rural, and it's been able to project forward, right? That in an evidence-based approach, that knowledge, of the demographics and changing demographics profile, and with that, being able to plan then properly for it. So plan for your community needs, your educational needs, your health needs, your housing needs, but most importantly, your economic and employment needs. So you've got this understanding of your demographic profiling and your population projection, and then being properly able to plan for that within your development plan, within the policies and objectives of the development plan, and then the responding, say, community in terms of developers and investors understand then what they need to do within the evidence-based approach to satisfy the requirements of the evidence-based approach set out in the policies and objectives of the development plans. I mean,
but how far forward? I mean, I understand you're not basing it on the needs of an area today, but how far forward do you project? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 40 years?
Yeah, well, in the development plan process, the development plan has a 6-year time frame, and within that time frame, they allow what's called a 3-year headroom. So from that period of a development plan review, you're projecting forward or planning forward for 9 years minimum. But we'd even say that you should be looking at 20 to 30 years. And that obviously leads in with the new formulation of the National Planning Framework, which is looking up to 2040, which is really good. So you're definitely talking planning for at least 10 years. but 15 to 20 should be your base. You know what I mean? To give you that evidence.
Sorry. No, I'm fascinated by this because I'm thinking of, yes, there's the key infrastructure that needs to be put in place around that. But in Ireland, we don't have a great track record of planning strategic or infrastructure investments.
Yeah.
And plan that far in advance. So as in, we seem to know the need for it. We seem to say that it was needed a decade ago, and yet we don't seem to get the funding requirements and the planning in place that far in advance. Why is that?
Well, I suppose there has been that divide or that separation between, say, forward planning and also infrastructure provision. And that has been that separation. However, with the new approach under the National Planning Framework and the new national infrastructure plan, development plan, those have come together more closely in this, the 2040 Ireland plan. You know what I mean? They're bringing those two together, which is a really great step forward. So they're linking the planning with the infrastructure requirements. And we have, correctly, as you say, Cara, we have been somewhat devoid of providing what we call in our space critical infrastructure. And you touched on it earlier, Brian, the critical infrastructure for the second runway, the second northern runway at Dublin Airport. That's considered critical infrastructure. Like our transportation links, that's critical infrastructure. Our health infrastructure, absolutely critical infrastructure. And there has been that, void there. But again, through the linking of investment with proper planning now, it will catch up, because we're in a space of catch up, and there will be much more integration and linking between the two.
Have we been guilty of bad planning in the past? I mean, it does sound as if it's a lot more clear, blue cloud thinking, as they say, in relation to this now at the moment, of what you're saying anyway.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually call it bad planning, but it's maybe a lack of, in certain areas, evidence-based planning.
Evidence-based planning. That's the important.
Yeah, so maybe the methodologies or tools and techniques mightn't have been as tried and tested as they are today. So you're kind of planning in a different space where now there is really good processes, practices, methodologies out there to really inform what leads to good planning, both for the public sector, so the development plan preparation, as I said, and then also in the private sector responding to that, so they can provide the necessary either social, economic or community infrastructure required, to really bring on areas.
Governments and local authorities then are obviously looking at it with that sort of evidence-based perspective in mind, as opposed to the past. Then was that the way you would put it?
Exactly. And that
can I interject here with a bit of normally I'm the idealist of the group and Brian's the cynic, but there's an area of this that I'm quite cynical about, and that is the political interference. So things are on a roll now in terms of infrastructural planning. Is that going to come to a crashing end at the end of Fine Gael's term or the end of our current housing minister? We seem to put big, important, key projects on hold when there's political change, and then we seem to be very much really swaying in the wind wherever the political winds are blowing. And is that the reality of the planning? How much of this is subject to the political party and order of the day?
Well, there obviously, planning has a big input from the political space, and that absolutely, because the politicians are there to represent the citizen, the community, society as a whole. So it absolutely is necessary, you know what I mean? And they have a voice in that. My opinion is with the formulation of this, what we call Project Ireland 2040, where it's brought together the new planning framework, national planning framework, and the national development plan, where it's brought those two together, and this was agreed and signed up by all within the political space. There's real certainty there.
So there's cross-party support.
Yeah, and there's certainty there now about what are the key infrastructure requirements, the key infrastructures to be provided, and there's real sign-up and buy-in to that. You know what I mean? Which is really going to, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, is going to transform the Ireland as a whole, but also really our urban areas and the linking and integration of our urban areas. Again, going back to the shift towards urbanisation, which is key for the citizen again.
Okay, and look, I understand that Ireland is not isolated in this, that this trend towards urbanisation, it's a global trend. I think at the moment, is it 50% of the world's population live in urban areas, and that's likely to be 2/3 over the next...
They're saying by 2050 we're going to have 75% of the global population is going to be living in urban areas, in our cities effectively.
But does that raise a threat to rural Ireland? Because I'm very conscious that despite the fact we're going out on air on Dublin South FM, you know, we're podcasting nationwide and hopefully internationally, Brian, if we play our cards right. But for rural Ireland, this shift towards urbanisation, is this going to grow the urban area of Galway? Is it going to grow the urban area of Waterford or of Limerick? Or is this growth going to be restricted really, as we've seen, to Cork and Dublin?
Well, just if I can on that space again, say going back to our national planning framework, so they've identified our 5 key urban cities where there's going to be growth, but in association with that, they've identified a number of other key urban areas, primary and secondary urban areas.
Like large market towns like Athlone or...
Exactly, Navan, etc. So within that space, the idea is to concentrate growth within those cities particularly, and also in the other urban areas, to concentrate them on, where possible, on brownfield sites, so your footprint is not increasing. And as we spoke earlier about density and height as well, so bringing in proper planning and design within that space as well. But in a way, it's very hard to combat the globalisation of this urbanisation that's happening.
And we have to respond that.
And we have to respond, very sensitively to that, but using really proper planning and design to relate to that as well. But also protecting our, say, rural towns and villages within that space.
And the economic strength of rural Ireland as well. I mean, because that's sometimes something that's undermined when rural areas are considered almost as commuter spaces. For example, I saw in one of the reports that the Greater Dublin area included Longford. Now, in what universe in a country the size of Ireland can the Greater Dublin area include Longford? That surely isn't the case. Look, I understand you mentioned there that the development in those areas, you're looking at brownfield sites, but we're joined by Robert Colleran here on the panel today. And Robert, you've got a good finger on the pulse in terms of development land, not just in Dublin but across Ireland. I mean, is it true? There was a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers said that there are vast amounts of development land, and that comment got quite a lot of criticism. And I think the difference there was that perhaps there might be vast amounts of land, but is it zoned and is it suitable for development?
Well, it's a combination of, is it zoned, is it serviced, is the public transport there. So I know William touched on Navan. So Navan would be seen as a strong commuter town, good shopping facilities, good travel distance from Dublin. Blackcastle lands, other sites in the area have sold. There is an SDZ which was in Navan. It seems to be coming back again. But the key thing here is also price affordability. And what you're finding is that commuter towns are becoming more attractive because of the mortgage lending criteria. If you can buy a property, slightly less than 300,000, or in that kind of 290 to 300 or 350,000, you're getting into affordability. And then if you're tied in, you might be you could be Drogheda, you could be North Wicklow, you could be Naas, Kildare. If you're within a commute distance of Dublin, you can commute into Dublin, live further out, but your travel distance is the same. It depends on public transport, but then
of course,
and
actually that's probably what we saw, say in terms of Gorey, because obviously Gorey in North Wexford, that's an area that once the M11 opened, it really opened up that town or that region in North Wexford. to a much greater extent than parts of South Wicklow have been opened up. So there's an example of an area that's probably 20-30 kilometres further away from the city and yet is infinitely more accessible because of the motorway.
It's the commute time and distance. I have a site coming up in Gorey, and there'll be strong demand in it, but at the same time there's limited planning there. I think Gannon had a site recently that exchanged, that sold. There's probably more demand for land there, but it's not zoned. You'll have to wait for the next development zoning to come through.
Can I just go back to one point there, because I mean, speaking of a local story, there's the zone, the development zone in Cherrywood. There's a lot of anxiety there. We've seen the stories last week of the survey done that I'm not quite sure of the company that did it, of the traffic problems now that are in Dublin. I
think it was Stephen Donnelly, the TD, actually filmed that or put it out on Facebook Live.
There are concerns now locally here that Cherrywood, with all the people moving in there, and obviously with cars then and so forth, that the motorways and the tram, the Lewis tram, simply can't cope with the numbers.
Yeah, I think so. I think the benefit with Cherrywood, and if you're talking about future planning, Hynes have actually gone and done it right. They've put in a good road system. They've put in within the Cherrywood, within the 416 acres. The proper road network there. They've built facilities. You've football pitches, tennis courts. All of that is in place. It's a matter for the public to use the public transport. You have a feeder bus to the Dart. You have connectivity.
What's the Dart, right?
Yeah, so the park would provide a feeder bus to the Dart, but you've also Lewis, which is there. Lewis has been there for the last 10 years. So it's a case that there is good public transport, because you have Dart, Lewis, and then you have the bus network. It's a matter for the public to use it, but what you do find is that there's a bit of a bottleneck coming out from town, and it's just the M50 traffic is coming out and verging with the N11. So on a Friday afternoon in particular, once you hit 5 o'clock, there is that pinch point. I don't know how
but
to.
You feel that then it's responsibility of the residents and tenants within Cherry.
Well, it's a case of
commuters.
If they use the public transport, is it a case that can you get more use of the Lewis there, more regular occurrences? But even at the moment, like I hear people giving out if they're hitting. If they're travelling in from Leopardstown at a certain time, the Lewis might come along and it's full, or it's packed. It's just, I suppose, if everybody's going to turn the tap at the same time. That's there is hot spots, where you're going to have that problem. But I think if public transport is used properly, it should help, but it is a problem. I don't know how to fix it.
Can I draw your attention, gentlemen, to it was a piece in the Sunday Independent, actually by Conor Skehan this week, and apparently, I'm not sure what report this came from, but apparently Dublin is the third most congested city in the world, after Bogota and Rome. And just before we finish up on this, I really have to say that I think Conor Skehan probably nailed it. He said traffic congestion will never be entirely solved. Our aim should be to make it less bad, more tolerable, and at more acceptable levels. But I think he finishes by saying that the answer doesn't lie in the hands of traffic planners, but instead it lies in the need to reform governance to provide a city region level control with high levels of autonomy, where the power to raise and spend money, but also to provide leadership and vision to make hard decisions. So he's asking for our planners to make more tough decisions. But in true Conor Skehan style, he does close out by saying we will have to fix our governance before we can fix our traffic.
Okay, and that's the end of part 2. We'll be back with Robert Colleran and William Hynes after the break, so don't go away.
South Dublin. This is Dublin South FM.
Could you and your dog spend 1 hour per week bringing special moments to people in care centres? Or would you like one of our volunteer visiting teams to come and visit your care centre? At Irish Therapy Dogs, we have a dedicated interest in the use of pet therapy for people in long-term or daily residential care. A professional organisation aimed at providing a pet therapy service on a national basis. If you with your dog would like to get involved, or if you would like one of our visiting teams to visit your care centre, then please call us on 01 544 6198 or visit irishtherapydogs.ie for more information.
Do you need a professional-looking website or graphics for your company? Does your current website work on all modern devices, such as tablets and smartphones? If not, you are losing business. Preamp Digital Media provides a full range of solutions to give your company the edge in today's digital world. Please visit www.preampdigitalmedia.com for all the information you need. That's www.preampdigitalmedia.com.
I've always provided. That's what I do. Even when the job shut down, I somehow managed. But the pressure chips away at your confidence. I felt alone. I needed to talk things out. I learned Samaritans isn't just for when you hit rock bottom. I'm glad I called.
It's always worth getting problems big and not so big off your chest. Call Samaritans. No pressure, no judgment. We're here for you. Anytime, talk to us. Free call 116 123 or go to samaritans.ie.
So this is
broadcasting to South Dublin on 93.9. This is Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters here in Dublin South FM with Bryan Fox and Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iProperty or iPropertyRadio, or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. You can also text the show at 087 939 2000. And we still have Dr. William Hynes here, Managing Director of Future Analytics, and also property expert Robert Colleran. So let's get back to you, William, again. Can we discuss the new roles of regional assemblies and the formulation of regional spatial economic strategies? Sounds very, very... Can you just give us some light on that particular topic?
Yeah, so again, going back to our national planning framework, embedded in the national framework was the need to produce these regional spatial and economic strategies. They're basically replacing the old regional planning guidelines. They're being produced by the 3 regional assemblies of Ireland, and Ireland is divided into these regional areas, 3 now that we have, and these are, for the first time in these regional, say, strategies, they're bringing in not only spatial planning but economics. So they're bringing in the economic content to them. So what is economically going to be viable in these areas? So the 3 strategies now are in draft preparation at the moment, and they're out. Some of them are out on public display, and some have just come off display with submissions just being received. But for all intents and purposes, they're all going to be implemented and adopted by April, May of this year. And they are going to be the link between our national planning framework and our development plans, our city and county plans. So if you want to take the national planning framework, that's at a national level. The regional strategies are going to be, as I say, strategic, and then development plans are going to be the evidence base on the ground. So the development plans are going to take, say, the policies, objectives and guidance from the regional that's been enforced or driven by the national planning framework, and implement them on the ground within their planning jurisdiction. And what's really helpful is now, throughout the whole of Ireland, all the development plans the timing of the development plans are going to be aligned. So I said earlier about a development plan as a 6-year time frame, but a lot of our city and county plans are out of sync with each other. You mean within that time frame, but these regional strategies, when they're adopted, are going to allow for the alignment of these, so all plans,
so everybody's on the same page, basically.
Exactly. And then you can plan properly, and they're going to take what's coming from the assembly guidelines or strategies and implement them in an evidence-based way on the ground within their cities and counties, and which is really a new, novel but very informed way of doing it.
But when it comes to economic strategies, then is it up to the local authority or to the local trading association or whatever it might be to try and attract business to that area?
Exactly. And again, within the strategies and the formulation of strategies, there was a lot of, say, consultation and a lot of opportunity for the business community, the private community, to make submissions into it, to these strategies, to say what we feel is needed for our area in terms of economic growth, infrastructure provision, etc. A lot of that will and has been taken on in the various drafts of the strategies, and then as I said, when they get adopted, it's then up to the local authority working again with the business community and the local community to ensure the delivery of the infrastructure, economic provision set out there.
So you're sort of customising the area to suit your own particular patch in terms of what industry you want to attract? Would that be one way of looking at it?
No, not necessarily. Again, it comes back to the evidence base.
Yeah.
So what is required in an area based on demographic or population growth against the needs of that growth in terms of community infrastructure, health infrastructure, economic development, then you as a local authority you've got the evidence base to know what can be sustained, and then you can work then with the business community, with the private sector community to ensure as best as possible that it is implemented and delivered on within the period of that development plan, again the 6-year period of the plan.
Yeah,
so
it's an interesting one because there's a lot of controversy now. I'm sorry, Carol, I just wanted, because this is an interesting point, this is an interesting topic at the moment, because as we see in New York now, New York City, there's huge embarrassment in relation to Amazon pulling out, and there's arguments as to who forced them out or why they were forced out. Some would say that because of the bad publicity and all the contrary publicity.
Is this Apple and Athenry?
They decided to run, or Apple. So my point being, it is obviously one has to be very tactful in what they attract to their particular community, surely.
Yeah, and to make sure it works.
And
And that comes back, as we touched on earlier, and Robert touched on it, about having the services in place, the infrastructure in place to be able to support these economic drivers, these economic growth engines within the area, and also that it sits side by side with the existing community, be it residential or the existing economic community, that they're not in conflict with each other, and they're working in unison. And again, these strategies and our delivery of the development plans afterwards can really ensure that integration.
Okay, but would I be right in saying that the delivery falls to, in the most cases, private property developers?
No, well, the delivery mechanism for the spatial strategies, the regional spatial strategies, will rest on the local authorities in their city and county plans.
But isn't it dependent on private developers actually wanting to develop in those areas and being able to attract finance?
Well, in the policies and objectives then that follow into the development plan, it's a combination, as it always has been, between the local authority, the private business community, and also the resident community already there. So it's always working together, but it does that the public sector, the local authority, has to be very cognizant of the need for the private sector to make it work, to make that investment work. But they also have to provide investment themselves in the social infrastructure, the community infrastructure as well.
Because with these, even the best plans require they need the commercial support, people who believe in the plan, that actually believe in the future potential of the area and are willing to invest their time and energy, and they take the risk in developing that area. But there's another side to that, and that is accessing finance. So I know, Robert, that's something that you're involved in at the moment in terms of developer finance. Now, a couple of years ago, developers are finding it difficult to get finance for development outside of the Greater Dublin area. Has that changed?
It all depends on planning. See, if a site has full planning permission, a developer can borrow off it, because then they'll know what the takeout rents, what the takeout prices are afterwards. But if a site doesn't have full planning permission and it has a general view as to what planning can go on it, it would be very difficult for I suppose a developer or a purchaser to get finance from one of the pillar banks. So what they might have to do is go to an alternative financial institution. There's probably about 10 of them out there in Ireland, and seek what you'd say is nearly a bridging finance to purchase the site, then get the planning permission, and then at that stage, once they have full planning permission and they're ready for development, or they've started development, they might look to refinance at that stage.
Right.
Or it could be a case that they partner up with a large I suppose a large foreign investment fund that could back them. So you might see John Ronan Real Estate or
partnering up.
Yeah, or other large developers who are Irish based partnering up with an outside fund.
Okay, and where that happens, would it be right to say that the alternative development finance or the finance coming not from the pillar banks, that would be at is it a significantly higher rate, a relatively higher rate?
It would be. Look, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but you're probably talking 10 or 12% interest rate.
So
it all depends on the site, really, and the viability of it. But
that must affect the viability of it.
It does. Certain properties are seen as being positive. You can gauge on if it's private rental sector, you have an indication of where the rents are, so you kind of more or less know what the future rental income would be. You can stress test that. If it's a nursing home, you can look at what Billy does, look at the demographics, look at the age group. You know roughly what the demographic is, what the occupancy is. Then you can gauge it off the fair deal rate. If it's student accommodation in a certain area, you'd know roughly, is it viable in an area and what students would be willing to pay for it. So in instances like that, you can nearly work out what the return on the investment is. Then what you do is you take the cost of construction, development profit, 15% or 15% plus, and to see if it's viable. What you run is a development appraisal, and then you come back and see is it worth developing or not, and then that has a direct impact from the banks or the building societies. They'd see is it something that we can finance.
Okay, and where, with that in mind, where are you seeing developers looking for sites at the moment? I mean, is it across Ireland, or is it still very much in Leinster?
No, it would tend to go Dublin, Leinster, Cork. Now you see elements, Galway and Limerick are taking on, and then it's the commuter towns from there. But it is largely city focused, and it depends on the return.
But with the regional, spatial, and these sort of economic strategies as well, does it not help the construction industry to sort of target where it's economic, where it's profitable to build houses nowadays?
It has to be profitable. In the end of the day, unless you're a housing body that's state run, it has to stack up. And what stacks up is house building to a certain value. And I've even seen recently is that certain housing estates they've submitted planning to go for smaller houses, because they find that the larger houses, which are priced, they might be priced over the 500,000-600,000, just aren't selling in commuter towns, and they'll have to go back towards the lower price 350, 300 price level. So
I suppose what I'm trying to get to is how does someone involved in construction decide where to go? I mean, do they look at the future potential of that area, or what determines the decisions?
If it's in certain areas in Dublin city centre or Dublin suburbs, you pretty much know based on evidence what's there. But if it's further out, the likes of William here will look at, future analytics will drill down, look at the demographics, look at the level of demands, look at the infrastructure, and they'll actually stress test it to see if development in that town is feasible. And it's down to a myriad of things. It's down to public transport, it's down to amenities, it's down to
future planning, I suppose.
But it's future planning, but the next level of age group, what's in the demographics, who wants to live in that area, just it's even down to the number of children in a family that are reaching an age where they want to buy a house.
To mention that awful word that's going around at the moment, is the construction industry getting a little bit anxious in relation to what's happening in relation to Brexit and that non-developing story at the moment?
I think so. I think in terms of commercial, it's been strong so far. In terms of what I've seen is that the office take-up has increased. There's strong demand for the likes of flexible workspace, as in serviced office providers are benefiting. You can see, in terms of the large tech companies, multinationals, there's good focus on Ireland. From that point of view, it's strong. I think the level of demand is going more for rental than purchase.
Well, that's probably because of availability, though, would it not?
Well, no, it's availability, but it's also, if you're a senior, you might be a CEO or a senior exec from a London-based firm. You get sent over to Ireland, you look to rent rather than purchase. So it is a case that there's probably more demand, especially in the likes of the Docklands, for rent rather than purchase. So it's a case that some of the larger houses in the south suburbs and north suburbs, good affluent areas, that you find that the rents are increasing. The rents are going from 5,000 to 8,000 euro a month in some cases, whereas they're sticking on the sale price.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one. So how does that make it attractive then for these institutional investors when you see the yield being pushed downwards like that?
Well, it depends. That's for large houses, but at the same time, institutional investors will look at Dublin Docklands. They look at the rent levels that are there at the moment. So there's pent up demand for certain areas. Like, people want to live and work and walk close to where they're working. Other senior people with families might want to live further out, but there is pent up demand in the Dublin Docklands area. And then what you find is the rest of the staff, maybe the younger staff, are looking for more affordable accommodation in around the 1,800 a month or less in commuter towns, but with good public transport. So you're finding that you're on the Dart or on the Lewis, and you're having to travel that bit in.
And just to add to that, we are having a sea change in our, say, working approach. So our work-life balance is really coming to the fore now. So people, when they're looking at locations to either buy or rent, quality of life is so important. Access to amenities, access to services, access to community facilities is as important as access to employment.
Life-work balance.
Yeah.
Okay, that just about concludes our special episode of Property Matters. Thank you for joining us on Property Matters, the show where property matters.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, William and Robert. That's great. Okay, Brian, I think today you'll agree we've gotten some really great insights from the property experts, and I know I, for one, have learnt a lot. So again, thank you, gentlemen. But next week we're actually going to go back and we're going to adopt what the Buddhists refer to as a beginner's mind or a beginner's mindset, because we're actually going to go into New Park School. We're going to talk to a group of future designers, builders and urban planners about how they see the future of the market. And by the way, we do want to hear from you and to hear your thoughts on this, so please do get in touch with us and with the show by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com.
Sounds great, Carol, but as far as today is concerned, we want to thank Dr. William Hynes of Future Analytics and veteran property expert Robert Colleran for being on the show with us today. Peter Brow is on sound, Katie Tallon produced. We're back at the same time next week, but stay tuned for more of Bowl of Soul, which is coming up next. But from Carol Tallon and me, Bryan Fox, goodbye.